One a dark and sullen night, Anthony arrived at the old house that he had recently purchased. The house was located on the outskirts of the city, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Anthony had always been fascinated by old, historic houses, and this one, seemingly centuries old, had a unique allure for him. As he entered the house, the creaking sound of wooden floorboards under his steps echoed. Everything there felt forgotten and abandoned. Dust covered every corner, and nothing but silence and darkness filled the space. The walls were adorned with old paintings, most of them faded and barely visible. Anthony began exploring the rooms, moving from one to another. Each room was filled with the antique furniture and old objects. Yet, something strange lingered, a restless feeling he couldn't quite explain. It felt as though the house was watching him. While he was examining a dark room, a faint sound came from upstairs, the sound of footsteps shuffling. Hesitant, Anthony headed toward the stairs. His heart was racing, unsure of what or who might be in the house. Maybe it's just the wind, he reassured himself, but the footsteps persisted. Cautiously, he climbed the stairs, each creak of the steps echoing in the sullen night. Reaching the top, he noticed a closed door at the end of the hallway, a door he hadn't seen before. It was as if the door had always been shut. Anthony approached it and slowly opened the door. Inside was an empty, dark room with only a window letting in the moonlight. But something strange caught his attention in the corner of the room, a wooden chair near the wall that seemed slightly out of place, as though it had moved. At that moment, he felt as if someone was standing behind him. When he turned around, there was nothing but a dark, shapeless shadow in the moonlight. Yet, he could clearly sense the presence of someone or something. Quickly, he returned to the room and shut the door behind him. As he turned to go back downstairs, a sudden crashing sound came from the windows below. The shuffling footsteps, which had started upstairs, were now coming from the basement. Anthony decided to find the source of the noise. The further down he went, the more his dread grew. In the basement's corner was another door, a wooden, old door that looked like it had never been opened. With trembling hands, he opened the door and stepped inside. The basement smelled of dampness and earth. In one dark corner, something gleamed faintly. As he approached it cautiously, he discovered an old wooden box, emitting faint creaking sounds. He picked up the box, and at that moment, muffled screams seemed to come from inside. Shaking, Anthony opened the box and found something he could never have imagined, a vintage photo of a family that clearly belonged to another era. But to his horror, the faces of the family members in the photo began to fade, replaced by blank, terrifying visages. Suddenly, Anthony realized that the house was not just an abandoned place but a prison for spirits and beings from another world. And now that he had opened the box, he had become a part of this sinister realm. Before he could act, the house door slammed shut violently, and footsteps echoed from all directions. The house began to tremble, and Anthony knew that escape was no longer an option.
Maybe for you there's a tomorrow.
It was a cold and dark night when Sarah was sitting alone in her old house. This house was famous for its age and dilapidated condition. Cracked walls and crumbling doors would strike fear into anyone's heart, but Sarah had no fear of the house. He was sitting comfortably in the living room by the fireplace, absorbed in the thoughts of his daily activities. Suddenly, he heard a soft sound from behind the door. At first he thought it might be the wind, but when the faint whispering sound repeated again, his heart began to race. He went to the door and with his hand on the handle, he thought that maybe one of his friends had come to see him. But when he opened the door, he found no one in front of him. The only thing he saw was a large old mirror in the corner of the hallway. The mirror, which had been left there for some time, now seemed to somehow be looking at Sarah. It was strange, the mirror seemed to instinctively emit a cold, unnatural light. Sarah decided to ignore the incident and returned to her room. But every time he looked in the mirror, he felt something was there. Dark and vague images appeared in the mirror. Vague faces as if they were looking at him through a mirror. That night, while Sarah was sleeping, she heard footsteps in the house. Steps that never came from anywhere. When he opened his eyes, he was horrified to see a black and faceless shadow standing in front of him in the mirror. The shadow never went away, even when Sarah tried to go to the mirror. A few days passed and Sarah could no longer stay at home alone. Every time he looked in the mirror, the shadow was getting closer to him. Finally, one day when he mustered up the courage to take the mirror out of the room, he realized that an old secret was hidden behind the mirror. Behind the mirror are faded words, "Whoever looks into this mirror has released my host." From that day on, no one saw Sarah again. People say that the sound of cold and broken footsteps can stay be heard from that house at night. One cold autumn night, a group of old friends decided to get together after a long time. Arash, the leader of the group, suggested that this time instead of a cave, they go to an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, a house that became famous for a terrible murder many years ago. The house was at the end of a dark dirt road. High walls covered with moss, broken glass, and the smell of dampness and oldness had turned the house into an eerie place. The friends were a little hesitant at first, but the excitement and adventure overcame their fear. When they entered the house, the atmosphere was heavy and silent. No other sound could be heard except for the creaking sound of the wooden floor and the wind blowing between the door and window seams. Arash lit the way with the flashlight he brought with him, and the friends went to the big hall of the house. There was an old table in the middle of the hall with some half-burnt candles still on it to make the atmosphere more interesting. Naima suggested that they play a game of summoning spirits. Everyone agreed with excitement and a little trepidation. Arash took out the Ouija board from his bag and placed it in the middle of the table. Everyone sat around the table, put their fingers on the game board, and Arash began to recite the summoning sentences in a serious tone. "If there is a spirit in this house, contact us." There was absolute silence for a few moments. Suddenly, the page began to move slowly. Everyone thought one of the friends was trying to make a joke, but the frightened look showed that no one was joking. The screen showed the letters, "Go." There was heavy silence. "Why do we have to go?" Arash asked with a trembling voice. The page moved again, and this time it read, "It's not safe here." Suddenly, a loud voice was heard from upstairs, as if someone knocked hard on the door. Everyone jumped. "It was just the wind, wasn't it?" Naima said shakily. But he himself did not believe. Arash decided to go upstairs. Friends followed him hesitantly. The stairway was dark and the flashlight cast strange shadows on the walls. When they reached the upper floor, they saw that one of the rooms was open and a faint sound could be heard from inside. They approached the room with fear and trembling. Arash opened the door cautiously. Inside the room, there was an old and broken wooden chair and a large and cracked mirror. But what was most terrifying was the trail of blood that stretched from the mirror to the wall. Suddenly the image in the mirror changed. They did not see themselves, but a man with a scary face and empty eyes staring at them. "You shouldn't be here," came a terrifying voice from the mirror. At that moment, the door was closed and the flashlight fell from Arash's hand and went off. Everyone was screaming in total darkness. The sound of heavy footsteps was getting closer and closer. Naima tried to open the door but it was locked. Suddenly, everything went silent. The door opened and they quickly ran out of the room. When they reached the lower hall, they found that the candles had been lit again, and on the wall was written in blood, "Come back again, there will be no coming back." They barely survived that night. None of them ever returned to that house, but whenever that night was talked about, they kept silent and only put on frightened face. But the truth is that no one knows what really happened in that house. In the heart of a small town, there was an old and abandoned library that had been closed years ago. The people of the city talked about this library with hidden fear. It was said that whoever entered there at night never returned. But no one knew the reason for this. Ada, a curious 6-year-old girl, was very interested in discovering unknown secrets. Since childhood, he was fascinated by the stories he heard about the old library. When he realized that no one dared to go near there, he decided to find out the truth himself. One cold autumn night, when a heavy fog covered the city, Ada took a flashlight and went to the library. The library door opened with a simple push, as if it had been waiting for someone for a long time. The smell of dirt and old papers filled the entire library space. The shelves were full of books that had been gathering dust for years. Ada began to search. But something seemed strange. Some of the books seemed to have no intelligible language at all, as if they were written in mysterious script. Among the shelves, a book with a thick black cover caught his attention. Only one word was engraved on the cover of the book: Oblivion. Ada was curious and opened the book. Its pages were full of strange drawings and incomprehensible writings. But something in the book attracted him. Suddenly the words began to change. Sentences appeared as if they were talking to him. "You're looking for a truth you should know." Ada's flashlight went off and the room fell into darkness. At that moment, he heard a whispering voice from among the shelves. When he turned his flashlight back on, he noticed that the shelves had shifted, as if the library was alive, trapping him in the middle of it. Ada tried to find a way out, but every time she went to the door, she was back at the same spot. The black book was still in his hands and now its pages were turning by themselves. He saw a page with a picture of a man with a soulless face and black eyes. Underneath the picture was written, "The last person to leave the library." Suddenly, the same man came out from the shadows with a dark face. Ada could not move. It was as if the library had taken its power from him. "Anyone who opens this book becomes a part of this place. Now you are one of us," the man said softly. The light of the flashlight was turned off and there was a heavy silence everywhere. The next day, when the people of the city passed by the library, they saw that its door was closed. But there was one strange thing. On one of the dusty windows, Ada's face was imprinted, as if she was trapped inside the library. From that day on, no one dared even come near the library. But every night, the sound of flipping books and mysterious whispers could be heard from inside. In a remote village, the old church bell rang every night exactly at midnight. Even when no one rang it, the sound of the bell not only woke up the people of the village, but also left a strange feeling of fear and sadness in their hearts. This church was abandoned years ago due to a mysterious incident. It was said that the priest there disappeared one night while praying, and since then, no one has been able to enter the church. Nader, a young man who had just moved to the village, considered these stories to be rumors and decided to discover the secret of the midnight bell. He believed that there is a truth hidden behind this story. One night, he took his flashlight and went to the church. The church was plunged into total darkness, but when Nader approached the door, it opened slowly, as if someone knew of his presence. The air inside it was cold and heavy. The old candlesticks and rotting wooden benches were still there as they had been left years ago. Nader went to the bell tower, where the big church bell was hanging. He climbed the dusty wooden stairs. Every step makes a slight groaning sound from the rotten wood. When he reached the top of the tower, the bell swung gently, as if moved by an invisible hand. Suddenly, a quiet and sad voice rose from the darkness of the tower. Nader looked for the source of the sound and noticed that a woman in a long white dress appeared from the shadows. The woman's face was dark and faded, but her voice was clear and full of sorrow. He said, "Why have you come here? This is the place of the forgotten, the outcasts." Nader gathered his courage and asked, "Who are you? Why does this bell ring every night?" "I am one who committed a great sin in the past. This bell wakes me up every night to remind me of my sin. But now that you are here, perhaps you can set me free," the woman answered softly. "How?" asked Nader. The woman pointed to the bell. "Break the bell. If you break it, I and all the spirits trapped here will be freed." Nader picked up the old hammer that was lying in the corner of the tower and went to the bell. He hit the bell with all his might. A deafening sound filled the air, and the entire tower began to shake. But instead of freedom, suddenly the sound of evil laughter filled the space. The woman looked at Nader and gave a cold smile. You made a mistake. This bell kept us imprisoned, but now that you've broken it, we're free, but at what cost? Suddenly the woman and all the shadows of the church disappeared. The tower collapsed and Nader was never seen again. From that day on, every night, not only the bell, but the sound of sad songs and sometimes scary laughter could be heard throughout the village. The people of the village have left the church, but whispers say that a rare spirit is now trapped in the bell tower, crying out every night, "Run, don't set them free."